I just dusted off an old journal from college and found an entry that was surprising, and not in a good way. So, Roman, you threw that out, right? No, I wrote a Row Talks race segment for us. So hopefully, in some way, this will be helpful. All right, here's the context. Freshman year of college, the school asked for volunteers, people who would be willing to have a prospective student, a high school student, stay with us for the weekend to help them decide if that's the college that's right for them. And I said, sure, I'd be willing to do that. Around 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, I went to the campus center to pick up my prospective student. When I got there, most of the people were black, and a couple of the guys were like skyscrapers. I was afraid I would be matched up with one of them, but I wasn't. I got a short, white guy. All right, stop right there. Some of my white viewers just heard that and thought, that's all? And they got their finger out to start scrolling. But put that finger away. Resist that tendency, that habit we have to dismiss, and stick with me just for a couple more minutes while I take a look at this. So, just to review, here we have a young white guy, thankful he was not paired with, thankful he was not spending time with a young black guy. Now, I had completely forgotten about this moment in my life, but upon reading the words I had written on paper, the thoughts and feelings I was having at the time all came back to me. And yet, I want to make something clear. And I say this not out of defensiveness, but because it's important for me that you understand this for me to make my point. This was not about me thinking I was better than any of them. This was not about me being afraid of them. When someone is uncomfortable around someone because of race or sexual orientation or gender identity, we're quick to say it's because of hate or because of fear of physical harm. But I don't recall thinking or feeling any of those things. I think there are times when the reason isn't that dramatic, but is still quite a big problem. I thought if I had one of those black guys spend time with me over the weekend, that I wouldn't know what to talk with him about. For me, the sense of foreignness alone was enough for me to be relieved when I didn't have to interact with any of them. Which I don't know is, I guess, a predictable result of a segregated childhood. All right, so at this juncture, if one of the authors I've been reading, or heck, maybe even one of my black friends, had been sitting with me under this tree and hearing me say that, they'd probably point out this. Robert, having a white child simply exposed to children of other races isn't enough. Well, darn it, maybe it's not sufficient. But I do think it's important, and I do think it's a problem when it doesn't happen. Okay, so it's important to me that you all understand how much I don't have things all figured out yet. And sometimes you may not realize it, but I'm figuring things out while I'm standing right here in front of the camera talking at you doing this Row Talks race thing. And sometimes I need to come back out here and film a second time because I've continued to think through the topic and have come up with more things to say. And that definitely happened while filming this segment. All right, let's take another stab at this. Remember when I said this? I wouldn't know what to talk with him about. With the information I had available, why would I come to that conclusion? Yeah, well, I should have kept in mind that I wrote this. Like skyscrapers? Okay, so height. Height clearly held some significance for me. I even mentioned the white guy as being short. So does this mean I was inappropriately, unnecessarily intimidated by the height of these black peers? Yes, it probably does. So then the question is, intimidated in what way? All right, look, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was afraid they might want to talk about... I was never good with sports. I dreaded gym class as a child. And yes, as it turns out, I held a stereotype that tall black guys were into basketball. If I had been assigned to one of those guys, it could have gone really well. He might have been considering psychology as a major, or into science fiction, or maybe we would have connected in a way that I can't even think of. That insecurity was a result of me working from stereotypes that led me to believe that I most certainly would have more in common with a white guy than a black guy. All right, so it seems I sort of came up with two different explanations. When I took my first pass at it, I attributed it to lack of exposure. When I took my second pass at it, I decided it wasn't just lack of exposure, but actual insecurity rooted in stereotypes. And thinking about those things was very important. But let's move on from that. Let's move forward from that in time and consider outcomes. All right, with all of this talking and reflecting, the question that is probably the most important to the larger community is quite simply, did I cause harm? Well, at that moment, I was simply writing in a journal. So I think it's safe to say the answer is no. But here's why this situation is so important to me. Because it reminded me that I am a person capable of doing so. So stick with me here, because this is probably the most important moment of all of Row Talk's race. This is where the rubber hits the road, where something inside of me could have a concrete negative outcome for a person of color. In the first episode, when I said that if I had not reoriented my perspective, challenged myself, I would have turned out to be a very different white person. Well, here it is. If I was still that person back then, if I had not confronted my own ingrained racial tendencies, in all these years since, I would have, maybe steered opportunities away from people of color toward white people who I was more comfortable with. And no, my pessimist viewers, this was not about me feeling guilty or beating myself up. That really wouldn't have been helpful anyway. Instead, some good things came of this. Looking back on this gave me a sense of humility and hope. Regarding humility, well, if I can find something problematic when I look at myself 20 years ago, what will the Robert in 2040 or 2050 something think of this me? In other words, I still have more to learn. And that humility is probably extra important for a white guy like me who's out here speaking pretty publicly about these things that I do not completely understand and I have never been on the receiving end of. And as for hope, well, the Robert of today has some tools in his toolbox that the Robert back then didn't have. I mean, when I keep turning the pages past that entry I read to you, I didn't find any further reflections about it. I didn't find any challenges. I'd like to think that the me of now would be operating more in a keeping myself in check kind of way. White audience, our homework is this. Reflect upon those problematic moments in our lives honestly and share them with each other so we can learn from them. And be outcome oriented, considering our real world impact. If you found anything of value in the Row Talks race segment you just watched, I encourage you to share the link with family and friends. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing Row Talks Race.